Good afternoon, listeners, and it's me again, Voice of the Forge, shooting straight from the lip. Now, the last video that I did involved the definition of being a journalist and how you could get your press pass and everything else in the UK to be a journalist and be able to undertake journalism duties. Pretty much, you have to prove that your income is your main source of income and that you are actually reporting on news. That's it. And there are umbrella companies that will take you on and get you your press pass. Now, today, we are going to dive into something which is somewhat murky, but it starts out being quite straightforward. Now, the first thing that I want you to do is think about our rule of law, both in the UK and the US, where we both have some similarities in the way in which things are carried out. But I want you to think about, is a law ever a law if it's never enforced? And if you cannot rely on the authorities to enforce it, what rights and remedies do we have? Now, I don't have all the answers, but what I am going to ask you to do today is think about that, chew on it for a bit, and either make your own videos in response or get in contact with me so we can have a hangout and discuss it, both do a bit of research online and have our evidences to hand. But to kick us off, with regards to this, I have to say that I suffer with anxiety. I cannot leave my flat on my own without having someone with me because I'm worried about confrontation, I'm worried about other people, and I know that I don't necessarily respond in the best way to incidents because my threat threshold is like a rocket taking off, which means that some people may see it as overbearing, threatening and aggressive, whereas in fact all I'm doing is I'm trying to signal that I'm the bigger dog to make them back down. I'm not necessarily threatening, but I can be intimidating. And it's part and parcel of how I deal with confrontation, which is not done in the best way. So I try to stay out of that. I do all my shopping online, and if I have to go somewhere, 95% of the time I take a taxi. Then I don't have to worry about any of it. But today, for the first time in ages, I'd run out of food, I needed something to eat, so a friend took me to a local shop. And on the way back I was very nearly struck by a cyclist riding on the pavement. Now, what is the law? Because everybody and his brother has an opinion, but opinions aren't facts. So, I did a little bit of digging, and I have some information. First of all, the most important is that, like all road users, cyclists must ride responsibly and within the law. This includes obeying traffic signals such as red lights, not putting pedestrians in danger by riding on the pavement, maintaining their cycle to a roadworthy standard and not cycling recklessly or dangerously. Now, you'll immediately straight away you'll see there's a reference to cyclists riding on the pavement. Okay, so then we go to, under the Highways Act 1835, as amended by section 85(1) of the Local Government Act 1888, cyclists must not cycle on a footway. Now, pavement doesn't have a legal definition, but footway does, and must keep to the cyclist side of a segregated cycle track. So if you see a dual lane where it's got pedestrian painted on one side and a cycle painted on the other, the cyclist, if they are on there, must stay on the cyclist side of that designated shared pathway. The pedestrian is advised not to, but doesn't break a law if they do. The cyclist does break a law if they don't stay to that side. Now, what else does it say? It says that the maximum penalty for cycling on the pavement is a £500 fine. However, in most cases, the police will issue a fixed penalty notice, which is also known as an on-the-spot fine, of £50. The maximum would only ever be imposed if the fixed penalty notice is contested and taken to court. Now, fixed penalty notice has, I believe, 28 days to be paid, or you say that you're going to contest it. And then if you don't do things in certain time scales, then you get penalties of 50% here and 100% there and elsewhere, which will drive up your fine towards that £500 maximum. I would also like you to notice that if you are going to be awarded a £500 fine, that will be done in a court. It won't be done through the FPN system itself. The FPN system is a way of trying to speed up certain claims against behaviours that are antisocial and criminal in such a way as not to take up an excessive amount of court time and yet still see that the rules are being enforced. Now, with what I've said that shouldn't ride on a footway, and I've mentioned a fixed penalty notice. Now, what is a fixed penalty notice? Well, it is something, and this is from a cyclist's defence website. It says, what is a fixed penalty notice? If you have committed a minor traffic offence, like cycling on the pavement or failing to stop at a red light, i.e. contravening a traffic signal. Now, I'll stop right there. So, straight away, the website dedicated to the Cyclists' Defence Fund has likened cycling on the pavement to jumping a red light. They're saying it's a minor traffic offence. Who deals with traffic offences? The police. Why do I bring this up? Because it becomes important to the conversation later on. Right, so it says, if you've done that, the police have the power to issue you with a one-off fine called a fixed penalty notice. A fixed penalty notice offers you the opportunity to discharge any liability to conviction by payment of a fixed sum of money. In other words, if you pay the fine, you will not be prosecuted. It is also noticeable here to state that there are two types of traffic fixed penalty notice, and they are usually designated by the Home Office with the initials N or E, which make them relatively easy to remember which way round they go. An N means that it is a non-enforceable type ticket for points on your licence. If it's an E, it's a higher fine and you get points on your licence. It's to do with the way in which these tickets are held. And to give you an example, a cyclist going through a red light is an N. If a motorist were to do this, this would be an E and 3 points on their licence. So to say that they aren't treated the same as motorists is quite true, but under the definitions which go right the way back, as I've said, to 1835, a cycle is recognised as being a carriage, which means it's a vehicle in modern parlance. So they do have rights and responsibilities that pedestrians do not have. Now, why am I writing this? Why am I talking about this? And why have I done this research? Well, for two things. One, coming back from the shop, a cyclist screeches to a halt in front of me. And one of the very last things that we actually notice, my friend and I, when we are talking to the police, is the fact that you can see a tyre mark on the pavement where the bike came to rest. So that is how we know how close this guy got before he actually managed to stop and not hit me. Straight away he got very verbal, so I got verbal back. And he decided that he was going to call the police because I was in the wrong. He wanted to go down the threats and intimidation and Section 5 of the Public Order Act. And all I'm saying is, at the end of the day, I am not committing an offence if I am merely pointing out that you are committing an offence. You are the one breaking the law. You are not the innocent party here. And you very well may feel threatened or intimidated, but that's an easy cop-out to try and get away scot-free when you've been caught bang to rights. Obviously, this has led me to be very upset because it's a confrontation that I did not want, I do not need, and it sets off all of my anxieties and everything else, even when I get back into the flat. If this was the end of it, the police had turned up and actually done their job, then there wouldn't be anything further to say. But according to the very knowledgeable PC, who sarcastically turned round and said, "Hang on a minute, I'll take the uniform off, you can put it on and you can issue the ticket." Apart from that, he told me that Lincolnshire Police, in the city of Lincoln, that's the county of Lincolnshire, in England, UK, that they do not deal with cyclists. That is a matter for the council. And yet, within 5 seconds of searching, I actually find an article in a local rag from last year. Now, this PC told me that the council had taken over the enforcement of cyclists and all the rest of it with street wardens, and that it was a bylaw, not an actual law, and he said that they'd taken it over 2 to 3 years ago. Funnily enough, the article that I found is almost a year old. It actually says on the website this story is over a year old, but they need to check their algorithm because we're not in November yet. This was written November last year. As far as we're aware, when this is created, it's the 30th of September. Now, I know I don't know a lot of things, but I'm fairly confident in saying that 11 months is not a year. And we've still got a couple of days on the 11 months side of things. So, quite obviously, this isn't the most up-to-date article, but it says that Labour councillors at Lincolnshire County Council are calling for increased enforcement of laws banning cyclists from riding on the pavement in Lincoln. They say that cycling on city centre footpaths is dangerous and is becoming a more frequent issue in certain areas such as Yarborough Road, Steep Hill and the High Street. Not the area that I'm on, which is Monks Road, but still, it's cycling on the pavement. Right? Now, the PC that I spoke to told me that the council are responsible for policing cyclists and that they were given the responsibility 2 to 3 years ago. And yet, the very next sentence is Police Chief Inspector for Lincoln, Stuart Bryn, has argued, however, that enforcement isn't always the answer, stating the onus must lie also with the cyclist to ride responsibly. Now, if you have someone calling for enforcement and a police officer responding to that call for enforcement, that would lead me to believe that the police have still got the power and the responsibility to enforce cyclists who ride on pavements in contravention of the law. And again, we have a county councillor called Rob Parker saying, for too long, local community and business groups in Lincoln have been reporting that cycling on the pavements is not only dangerous, but increasing. Right? He writes to Chief Inspector Stuart Bryn, asking him to change the approach to cyclists by actively ticketing those who ride on the pavement, and the Chief Inspector issues a reply in which he says that officers were aware of the issue and their powers to issue tickets. Now, the police officer that I spoke to told me that it was no longer his job, that the law has been changed. Police officers no longer deal with cyclists. And yet, I have an article within the time frame that he quoted of it changing, directly contradicting him. So, I have done this instead of phoning up the police station and maybe getting a police officer sent round because I'm ranting and raving on the phone to them. Because I want to know, if they turn around and say it's no longer their responsibility, whose responsibility is it? Well, I don't think they would like very much if people started going around with body cameras and started recording details of when people break laws. Why? Because there are some laws which are called strict liability, which basically means it doesn't matter what you thought you were doing. If you've done it, you've done it. And when it comes to traffic, a lot of those are strict liability laws. It doesn't matter if you didn't see the red light, you went through it. It doesn't matter if you only answered your mobile phone for a second. It's illegal to talk on your mobile phone without a hands-free kit. Right? These are things that can be easily prosecuted. These are things, and what people will say, oh, you're only having a go at the low-hanging fruit. Remember what happened when Rudy Giuliani took over New York City and he had a zero broken windows response to crime. That meant that every crime, no matter how mundane, how trifling, or how petty it may seem in comparison to murders, rapes, and violent conduct and everything else, what you found was that if you actually put police resources into an area and stopped areas getting run down and trashed with broken windows and graffiti, in short, if you stop the antisocial behaviour in an area, then it has a knock-on effect. Because if you turn around and you're there saying, right, no broken windows, people are getting prosecuted for throwing rocks through windows, which in the UK is criminal damage, the same person may not then be available to walk on the street with a knife. And we all know what happens at the moment in London, where we have over 100 people being killed so far this year. I don't know the exact number, but the last I heard of was around 106. Now, if you actually had the things in place to deal with this, and it's not just stop and search, but it's dealing with all kinds of petty crime, then we could take some of these weapons and some of the weapon wielders off the street. If you take them off the street, you don't get others either copying them because they are looking up to them, or you don't get other people arming themselves in defence. Which then means that if you can take one wielder off the street who has the inclination to use it, you may be taking 3 or 4 weapons off the street because people feel safer and don't feel the need to arm themselves. So when I say that if you do not focus on some of these small laws, then you will end up with a much rougher and much more violent society than you actually wish. I can relate this to my own experience in the police when I used to do uniformed patrols at certain underground stations, and we would wait for people coming through the station who didn't have tickets. And what we would do is we would have people in plain clothes and we would have uniform. And we would just be casting a general eye over people as they're coming through the underground, which means that people are seeing a police officer. They feel that they are being protected and watched over, and that they and gives you an overall situation of feeling safer. But what you also had was you had certain people that would see the uniform and react. Now, in our case, 90% of those reacting were people who didn't have tickets. They would see us on the other side of the barrier and they would try to move away and leave a different way where there weren't police. And that's where the plain clothes came in, because the plain clothes could single them out and either report them over the radio to police officers at a different barrier, or move in and stop them themselves, conduct the stop and search and everything else. And what we found was that those people who thought it was okay to ride on the underground without a ticket invariably also carried weapons, drugs, or other paraphernalia which was prohibited by law. Sometimes we would find people actually going equipped, which usually meant certain types of metal bars which could be used to break into and release the money from payphones. Yeah, okay, we don't have as many payphones as we used to. I'm dating myself here. But it was a legitimate concern. And likewise, the similar sorts of things could be used on cars to jimmy a door open. So we found that by tackling their ability to get into the area where they wanted to commit the crime, or even just hang out as part of a gang, if we contravened them at the station and we found other things on them like weapons or prohibited articles, not only did we have more offences with which to take them to court with, like with the knife, you're not going to be too worried about taking them to court for a ticket if you can get them for knife possession. There's no point in biting something on the ankle when you can chain them up in the criminal justice system. Not only does it mean that there's one less person riding without a ticket, which means that it's not as crowded on the underground, which one person isn't going to make that much difference, I know, but bear with me here on the analogy, but you've also taken a weapon off the street. And at the moment, it's weapons on the streets that are our biggest problem. Now, people turn round and say that stop and search is a hot button issue. Well, if you have reasonable cause to stop someone, it doesn't have to be a stop and search. Because if you turn round to them and say, well, you don't appear to have a ticket, thank you very much, with the changes in pace, every offence is now arrestable, you're now coming with me to the station so we can clear this out, you are then having the search done in the confines of a police station after they've been arrested. Stop and search doesn't come into it. You don't need to use the power. You don't need to use the drugs power. You don't need to use the pace power on the street. You are using the powers given to you under pace after arrest. So for anyone that turns around and says, well, stop and search shouldn't be increased, okay, well, find another way. Let's try and think outside the box, which is what we did, and we had results at the time. But if you have a police force, and right now I am talking about the Lincolnshire Police in the county of Lincolnshire, England, UK, who turn round and say that's no longer my job, what recourse do we have? And when I pointed out to him that council tax has a percentage paid to the police for policing, which is called the policing precept, and I said, well, okay, if you're no longer doing that, I want that portion of my precept back from my council tax. All he would say is, it's up to the council, it's no longer our job, it's not a law, it's a bylaw. Which, with 5 seconds on Google, I have proven, beyond the shadow of a doubt, is either a bald-faced lie or a training issue. Now, given what I know of Lincoln Police, and the fact that I will categorically state that by and large they are a bunch of noddies, they are useless, only rely on certain people because the rest of them are absolutely, well, let's put it this way, they're not even worth it. You step in dog shit. It's worth wiping it off your shoe. Right? This is lower. This is the sort the cachet that Lincolnshire Police has is in negative figures. We talk about the Met being bad and terrible and everything else, and yet Lincolnshire Police is ridiculous. And to have been given the information that I was given today absolutely outraged me, because I knew it couldn't possibly be right that it was all down to street wardens. And he gave me a timeline, I checked it, and his timeline is either massively out of date and it's something that's only been done in the last 6 months, of which there is no reporting. Okay, so there's no evidence. There's nothing in the local rags, there's nothing in the local papers, there's been no statements issued by the council or by the police. So if it has been in the last 6 months, it's been done under the table without residents knowing, which I think is something that is fairly significant if a police is having its powers taken away by a council. Or he is completely and utterly wrong. Now, is it the fact that he lied to me, or is it that he didn't know? Given the fact that he was so adamant that fixed penalty notices for cyclists were no longer his job, then I would say there's a fairly significant training issue if he was telling the truth and that's what he believed the way things were. That's not good. That's not good in any way, shape or form. So, this is the question that I put to you out there. What do we do about it? We see frivolous lawsuits going on every which way. But when someone is very nearly assaulted, recklessly, minding his own business, and the police refuse to do anything about it, and they say, not my job, Gov, what do we do to take that power back? Answers in the comments below, please. If you would, I would like it if you shared this around and if we had a conversation going. And I think this keys into greater concerns we have about our policing with consent, with regards to the policing of hate crime, nasty messages online, and all the other soft crimes they seem to be going after instead of actually going to the burglaries and doing everything else. That's it. Rant over. I thank you for your time. I thank you for listening. I am, as always, Voice of the Forge. And good night.